Hello and welcome to Saving Species and Combating Climate Change with RSPB NI. I'm Claire Barnett and today we're taking you on an online trip to some of our special conservation sites in Northern Ireland to find out what work is happening there to try and right some of the wrongs happening to our natural world and as a result our climate. And you'll learn about what we can do right here in Northern Ireland to take action against the climate and nature emergencies. Nature has a power to combat climate change, give wildlife a home and to support our mental health and well-being. I think that healing power is something we could all use at the minute. So if you've been missing those wee day trips across the country, come with us on an adventure to the beautiful Antrim Hills, Farmland and County Down and the shores of Portmore Lough. I have worked for RSPB NI since 2006. RSPB NI is a charity that is funded by people like you through donations and memberships. We work independently and in partnership with government, other organisations and businesses in Northern Ireland to restore and protect nature. I am one of 2 area managers in Northern Ireland where I have the great privilege of managing our operational work in the east of the country. One of the ways we can revive our world and build a more resilient future for Northern Ireland is to restore nature. And in today's event, we'll be looking at some of RSPB NI's important nature restorations projects. I think a lot of us are finding a greater appreciation for nature in these troubled times. And we are hoping a little trip out into nature with us will be just the thing you need to put a smile on your face. But we aren't going to stop there. Joining me today is Dakota Reid, a student and environmental activist, and my colleague, Dr. Jonathan Bell, an RSPB NI nature and climate expert.
Hi Claire, thank you. It's great to be taking part in this event today. Like Claire said, I'm the head of land and sea policy at the RSPB in Northern Ireland, where I lead policy work in a range of policy areas, including food and farming, peatlands, forestry, climate, natural capital, and marine policy. You might wonder what politics has to do with nature. Well, the laws and policies that govern us in Northern Ireland have a big impact on how we protect nature and manage the land where our wild species can be found. And this is particularly important because of Brexit. Northern Ireland will be making new laws, which means we have a big opportunity to ensure that these laws are as strong as possible to save nature. In our policy team, we work directly with the Northern Ireland Executive, and in particular, the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, to try and shape these laws and influence new policies. And this is how we met Dakota Reid, because it's not just organisations like the RSPB who can influence the government's decision-making. When passionate people speak up for nature, they have the power to make change happen. Isn't that right, Dakota?
Hello, thank you, Jonny. That's right. As a politics student, I believe that individuals can make a difference when we use our voices to advocate for change. This is why I joined Our Bright Future, a youth group campaigning for more time spent learning in nature and to give young people a greater voice in decision making. I've also been volunteering with RSPB NI for 2 years and recently joined the advisory committee. Like so many people my age, I know it's my future that's at stake because of the climate and nature crises, but I also know that there's hope. If the government dedicates funding to restore nature, we can turn things around. I've been working closely with RSPB NI on their campaign calling for a Green Recovery Fund to build a climate-safe, nature-rich future after the pandemic. I think it's something that everyone should get involved with, and I hope that today's event inspires lots of people watching at home to speak up for nature too.
Thanks, everyone. Today, we're going to be hearing from some of our colleagues at sites across Northern Ireland and finding out about the work being done to help protect some of our most iconic species. But just as importantly, we want to hear from you. We'll be hosting a live Q&A later. If you want to ask any of us a question, please post it in the comment sections below the live stream and we'll answer as many as we can at the end of the show. Just to let you know, you need to sign in or log in to YouTube to post your question. Well, we promised you all an adventure around Northern Ireland, so let's go. Dakota, where are we going to first?
First up, we're heading to County Down with one of RSPB NI's conservation officers, Mark McCormack, to explore the work that is being done on some farms to help at-risk birds survive during the winter months. These farmlands are home to some of our most iconic bird species, such as yellowhammers and barn owls, which are in serious decline. In fact, we believe that there are less than 40 pairs of barn owls in Northern Ireland. The people who work and live on these lands are passionate about protecting the wildlife who call their farm home. The first site that we'll be going to is Lough near Banbridge. This is Fiona and Shaw Hannah's farm, and they work alongside RSPB NI to put schemes in place to help wildlife flourish on their land, which is vitally important, especially during winter.
That's right, Dakota. Winter can be a really trying time for birds and other wildlife. It takes a lot of energy to keep warm at night. Birds really feel the cold, and you might have seen them hunker down in the branches with all their feathers fluffed up. This is to trap the air and keep them warm. Some birds like wrens and pied wagtails also huddle together for warmth in big groups. Birds need to replace the energy they use up trying to keep warm by eating. But winter is also a time when there is very little food to forage on. All the plants have finished seeding, the berries have been eaten from the hedgerows, and the ground can be very hard for them to get at insects in the soil. This time between November and March is what we call the hungry gap, the time when the birds are often left hungry with no way to replenish their energies. There are ways we can all help birds through the winter months by stocking bird tables and feeders in our gardens with seeds and nuts. But there are also ways that farmland and wild birds can be helped on a larger scale, and that is with something called wild bird cover. This is very specific seeds that farmers can plant, including oats, barley and linseed. And it provides enough food to fill this hungry gap and allow the birds to get into good condition for the breeding season. Right, I'm excited to get on the farm and learn more about this important conservation work. So I'm going to pass you over to Mark, who will be taking you on a rather windy journey from Lough Neagh near Banbridge to Jack Kelly's River Farm near Downpatrick.
Hi everyone, we're here in Lough Neagh, close to Banbridge in County Down, and the reason why we're here today is that I want to show you some of the habitats that are in place on this farm, which are of great importance to a number of priority farmland birds. There are three main needs of farmland birds. That is a safe place to nest, food in the spring and summer for their growing chicks, and then a winter food source as well. So all of those things are equally important for the survival of a number of the species that we're interested in. And behind me here you'll see a winter feed crop for wild birds, also known as wild bird cover, and also as well some winter stubbles which are being retained throughout the winter. And these things here, they provide that vital source of food, that seed source for birds during those winter months, which makes sure that they survive whenever the temperatures are really cold, whenever there's really bad weather. Gets them through the winter right up to the breeding season, so it's very, very important for their survival. So this is some of the oil seed in amongst this mix. So you see this here bit here will have seeds in amongst it, but then these ones here are still ripening, so that's going to produce seed going right through into the hungry gap, which means that the birds will have food right through those late winter months. And then in here as well, you've got, this was a sunflower, and you can see birds have been pecking away at this here. So you have linnet would have been feeding on this, everything from chaffinch, blue tits, all the usual sort of birds that you would expect to find. And there's still a little bit of seed left in there, so there's still more food to be provided for them. Over the last few decades, we've moved away in Northern Ireland from that mixed and arable farming to more of improved grassland for livestock and dairy. So there's a lot less seed in parts of the countryside where traditionally they would have been, but a lot of these birds have sort of evolved and adapted to sort of farming methods whereby they would have had this seed source in amongst their stubbles. So what the wild bird cover is doing, what that winter feed crop is doing, is creating that alternative source of seed for them during the winter months. So that can be anywhere. That could be on a livestock farm, it can be in an arable farm, but then as well with your traditional winter stubbles in amongst them, you get the spilt grain which provides that seed for the birds. So whenever the cereal crop is harvested, it's inevitable that some of the grains are going to spill down into the soil. So throughout the winter months, this stubble is left, and then you'll see like in amongst it, you have the cereal, which is the spilt grain, just down in amongst that. And then throughout the winter months, the birds will forage in amongst here, picking away at that there, providing that vital food source. But then as well, the small mammals will be coming in looking for this as well, and that's what makes this that excellent hunting habitat for your kestrel and for your barn owl. So right out amongst all that, you'll find these seeds just lying ready for the birds to eat. So again, that's just like another giant bird table for the winter months. So by providing these sort of habitats, you're not going to just help halt the decline in these birds, we can actually do something about reversing that decline as well. It really, really helps to strengthen the food chain and is trying to reset that balance. So the RSPB has worked with farms in County Down for a number of years, and part of the reason why farmers would get in touch with us is that, you know, they do recognise that the wildlife is a huge part of the identity of their farm and they're wanting to do something to help. So we would give advice on everything from hedgerow management to introducing that winter food source for the birds. And as well, if the farmer was interested in entering the environmental farming scheme or an agri-environment scheme, we would give advice on that and help them apply for that and then the management of that going forward. And as well, then we would actually come down onto the farm and carry out farmland bird surveys to basically establish what are the species of bird that call that farm home, and then we can then cater our advice based on what we find. So we've just moved about 30 miles over into the east of County Down, and we're on the Kelly family farm just outside Downpatrick. And just behind me you'll see a hedgerow that was cut just yesterday. And hedgerows are really, really important to not just wildlife on the farm, they're fantastic for all sorts of things like carbon sequestration, your carbon storage. They're good for biodiversity, good as shelter for livestock, but also as well they're good for biosecurity, reducing nose-to-nose contact between livestock herds. But the benefit to birds are just enormous. They provide a berry crop for birds during the winter, providing that food for them. They provide shelter. You have birds like yellowhammer are actually nest on the ground or very close to the ground, so they need that thick base to a hedgerow in order to nest and in order to bring up their young chicks. Now, having a hedgerow is great, but actually the management of the hedgerow is just as important, and this hedge here has actually been cut in that A shape, and that allows the sunlight to get down to the bottom and create and encourage that thicker base, which is really important for those birds that nest close to the ground. And as well, like cutting them on rotation once every 3 years thereabouts, because actually berries only grow in the second year of growth. So if you're trimming your hedge annually, it's actually really suppressive to that berry crop, which is a vital source of food for many birds. So it's cutting them on rotation once every 3 years and cutting them in an A shape just like this to really encourage that thick base, which is a vital habitat for wildlife on the farm.
I don't know about you, but I really enjoyed that wee trip around County Down and seeing all the great work that's underway to help create a safe home for birds like yellowhammer and other seed-eating birds like skylark and linnet. In different parts of Northern Ireland, you'll find different bird species that we would class as a priority. This means that birds need urgent conservation help to reverse their declines. In County Down, there are 9 species of farmland bird that have been identified as priority for conservation action, all of which have a red or amber conservation status. Red listed means it's a bird of high conservation concern. This includes yellowhammer, kestrel and barn. These species have either undergone more than a 50% decline over the last 25 years, a historical decline, or are species of global conservation concern. And don't forget, if you have any questions about anything you've heard, make sure you drop them into the chat. Jonny, I found it really interesting when Mark explained about hedgerows not only being a haven for nesting and feeding birds, but also a great way to store carbon. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, sure, Claire. It was great to watch some good hedge maintenance in action. What people might not realise is that hedgerows can support up to 80% of our woodland birds, 50% of our mammals, and 30% of our butterflies. They also stop soil erosion and increase and improve water quality. And what's even more incredible, hedgerows are really valuable in the fight against climate change. Hedgerows that are well maintained hold on to, or what we call sequester carbon. This makes them a key nature-based solution to the climate crisis, and one we can take advantage of here in Northern Ireland. In fact, enhancing and increasing hedgerows could deliver savings of up to 500,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent a year across the UK. This is as much carbon as would be released by the equivalent of 100,000 cars per year on average. Considering around 75% of Northern Ireland's countryside is farmed in some way, there are lots of hedgerow conservation opportunities. Through funding, education, and assisting farmers to maintain and grow more hedgerows in the right way, we aren't just making life on the farm healthier, we're also making the planet healthier too.
Thanks for that, Jonny. I bet a lot of people didn't know how incredibly important well-managed hedgerows are to nature and our climate. As Mark explained, if hedges aren't trimmed properly, they can become leggy and could eventually end up as a row of trees. This wouldn't be good for a number of farmland birds who need a scrub-like habitat for nesting. Jonny, you called hedgerows nature-based solutions. For anyone that hasn't heard this phrase before, would you be able to explain what a nature-based solution is?
Yes, of course. Nature-based solutions are actions that protect and restore natural habitats to help address the challenges that we all face, including climate change, biodiversity loss, and improving our health and well-being. Examples of habitats that deliver nature-based solutions to climate change on land include healthy and functioning peatlands, native trees, hedgerows, species-rich grasslands, and wetlands. Meanwhile, seagrass meadows or kelp forests are examples of habitats that deliver nature-based solutions at sea. When these important habitats are restored and well managed, they capture huge amounts of carbon from the atmosphere and lock it away, helping to mitigate climate change. They also provide a vital home to many species of plants and wildlife. Right now, as part of the RSPB NI's campaign to revive our world and secure a green recovery for Northern Ireland, we're asking the Northern Ireland Finance Minister to fund the restoration of these vital habitats. Dakota, you've been a big supporter of the campaign. Could you say a bit more about why you think restoring nature through a green recovery is so important?
Yes, I think a green recovery is essential for Northern Ireland. I've heard lots of people say that they want life to go back to normal after the pandemic, but our pre-pandemic normal was characterised by high carbon emissions and biodiversity loss. Even though Northern Ireland has lost more nature than anywhere else in the UK, by the end of 2020, the Northern Ireland Executive had failed on the majority of its targets to improve biodiversity. A new normal could mean green jobs that restore nature, tackle climate change, and help ease unemployment. This would be good for nature and people. If more people speak up for nature and insist on a green recovery, we have a better chance of securing a sustainable future for Northern Ireland.
I love that, Dakota, and you're right. A green recovery is a huge opportunity to build a Northern Ireland that is rich in wildlife, has lots of natural green spaces for people, and a safe and stable climate. Don't forget, if you want to know how to get involved with our green recovery campaign, or if you have any questions about the terminology used today, make sure you drop them into the chat. Right, back to our adventure. Where are we going next, Dakota?
Our next stop is the shores of Lough Neagh and at our Portmore Lough Nature Reserve and nearby Munchies Moss, where we'll be joining RSPB NI Project Officer Catherine Cochrane. It might get a bit wet and windy from time to time, but as Catherine will explain, winter is a great time to work in our reserves as it doesn't disturb the wildlife too much. During this important conservation period, RSPB NI staff will make sure that there is a safe and inviting habitat for some of our most threatened species and get everything ready for the birds that return to breed in the spring and summer months. When we catch up with Catherine, she's also going to show us the work that's been done to protect a favourite species of mine, the marsh fritillary butterfly. Over to you, Catherine.
Hi everyone, I'm Catherine and I work for RSPB here in Northern Ireland. Today we are at Portmore Lough Nature Reserve. We're going to talk about our breeding wader management and our species-rich grassland management before we move down the road to the Munchies Moss, where we're managing for marsh fritillary butterfly and Irish damselfly. Portmore and Munchies are part of the Lough Neagh lowlands and are located in the southeast shore of Lough Neagh. So we've just arrived on our viewing platform here at Portmore Lough, where you can see the lough in the background. This is an important feature for wintering wildfowl, particularly whooper swans that migrate here from Iceland to spend the winter here. You can also see a fairly recent addition to the reserve, this series of pool network. This helps control water levels and retain water on site for our breeding waders during the summer. We also manage water through a series of sluice and drain networks. We also graze the site during the summertime and then cut rank rushes in the winter using machinery, particularly tractor and flail. When you get a chance to visit Portmore Lough in the future, you'll take a dander down our boardwalk. When you look up into the woodland, you'll see lots and lots of tree sparrow boxes. Tree sparrows are in decline across the UK, but Lough Neagh seems to be a real stronghold for the species. So we like to give them a little extra helping hand here and provide nesting habitat for them to use. During the winter, tree sparrows will forage on our cereal plot, which we sow every year to provide extra food for our birds. Portmore Lough is a very important place for breeding waders. The team here go to great efforts to make sure that we've got the correct nesting habitat and feeding habitat for chicks, and also we have a predator exclusion fence to give extra protection from foxes and badgers. Lapwing here at Portmore Lough like to nest in short grassland, so we use a mixture of cattle grazing in early spring, and then in the winter we use specialist ground cutting equipment to control rank rushes. Portmore Lough is surrounded by a naturally occurring reed bed, which is a perfect home for reed buntings, reed warblers, sedge warblers and breeding ducks. So we've just arrived at Munchies Moss SAC, which is just over 2 miles from Portmore Lough Nature Reserve. Here we're managing for marsh fritillary, Irish damselfly and a number of important plants. RSPB have managed Munchies Moss now for 4 years through a European funding programme called Interreg, which is supported by the SEUPB. We've reinstated grazing to provide adequate habitat for marsh fritillary. We have removed 11 hectares of scrub, which has been impacting on the features of the site, and we've also created 1,000 square metres of open water to benefit Irish damselfly. Peat was historically extracted from this site and would have been transported throughout Northern Ireland using small boats on the Navi Drain. The Navi Drain is connected to Lough Neagh and Portmore Lough. We've been working for the last 4 years to restore this wet meadow behind us and turn it into a species-rich grassland. When we arrived on the site, the fast-growing grasses had gotten so tall that they were shading out the nice, delicate flowers underneath. By grazing the site with cattle allows us to eat off all the rank grasses and allow light to germinate the more delicate flowers below. In here you'll find meadowsweet, forget-me-nots and spearwort. Not only is a species-rich grassland important for biodiversity and our pollinators, it is also valuable as a carbon store, and this will help us combat climate change. Munchies Moss is a former lowland raised bog with a history of heavy peat extraction across the site. Previously, the peat would have been up here before it has been extracted right below the water table. A method called puddling was used, where they would mix peat like liquid chocolate before throwing it on the bank and drying it. As a result, lots and lots of peat ditches and pools have been left. This is a valuable habitat. Since peat cutting has stopped on the site, the pools have become choked with vegetation, which is not ideal. RSPB have decided to remove some of the vegetation and create areas of open water to allow the species to flourish. Over time, we expect these pools to become choked with vegetation again before commencing the cycle all over again. As we all know, getting out to experience nature and the outdoors is important for our health and mental well-being. RSPB have big plans to welcome you to the site in near future. We are installing a 500-metre boardwalk and an off-road car park so that you guys can come and get up close to nature.
I am a keen butterfly and moth recorder, so I really love that. It's amazing to see the work that's being done to conserve some of our most precious invertebrate species in Northern Ireland. And what I found really interesting is that species-rich grassland is not only important for butterflies and Irish damselflies, it's a valuable nature-based solution that can help combat climate change too. Claire, I bet you know lots about this valuable grassland.
I do. Species-rich grassland, or unimproved grassland as it's also known, has many benefits. It hosts a vast array of flowering plants, which is great for pollinators and provides ideal habitat for some of our rare species like the Irish damselfly and marsh fritillary butterfly. Agriculture dominates the land area in Northern Ireland, with almost 60% covered by grassland. Around 70% is improved grassland, which offers very little support to biodiversity. But species-rich grassland has real benefits to livestock. Many of the plants found within it have medicinal properties and can reduce the need for antibiotics and anti-parasite drugs. In fact, lots of our land has the potential to be species rich, but the grass is cut so frequently it barely has a chance to flower or set seed. But there are initiatives to change this, like the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, which is working hard to revive our land so pollinators can survive and thrive. We will add the link into the work at the end of this event. And you can help too. No Mow May is a great campaign that encourages garden owners, councils, businesses and farmers to leave the lawnmower in the shed and let flowers grow. But as well as creating beautiful places for wildlife to thrive, species-rich grassland also has a valuable role to play in combating climate change, doesn't it, Jonny?
Yes, Claire, in comparison to improved grassland, when species-rich grassland is in a good condition, it can store over 100 more tonnes of soil carbon per hectare. And we really need every tool in our arsenal to help us reach net zero in the future. Unfortunately, we've lost up to 97% of our species-rich grassland since the 1950s. So we must protect and restore the parts that we have left. There's so much potential for species-rich grassland restoration here in Northern Ireland. We would like to see future agriculture policy encourage and reward farmers for converting improved grass to species-rich grassland, making our existing grassland bigger, better, and more connected for nature.
Okay, I've never been to the Garran Plateau in the Antrim Hills, so I'm really excited for our last trip. Seamus Burns, RSPB NI's West Area Manager, will be taking us on a slightly foggy tour of Northern Ireland's largest peatland. And he'll show us the conservation efforts by RSPB NI, NI Water and NIEA to restore an important habitat for people and endangered species.
Hello and welcome to the Garran Plateau. I'm here in North Antrim where the largest blanket bog in Northern Ireland can be found. So the blanket bog behind me here is a large area of peat which has been formed by a little plant that grows here in the ground below us. It's a plant known as the sphagnum moss. And in the pools beside us here, this is where the sphagnum moss lives, and eventually it grows up, it builds up on top of itself and it forms that layer of peat that builds year on year. It's taken tens of thousands of years for this blanket bog to form. The plants that live here are adapted to the wetland conditions here for their survival. What makes this place so special is that it's an amazing place for wildlife. It's also a protected area. It's an area of special scientific interest here in Northern Ireland, and it's a special area of conservation protected under European law. And that leaves it home to rare and protected species like hen harrier, merlin, red grouse, curlew, viviparous lizard and marsh saxifrage. Peatlands are very useful in combating climate change. Peat stores carbon, and when we drain the peat, it dries out, it starts to erode. And what happens whenever the peat is bare is that it begins to run off the peatland into the water, and it starts to create an issue with water quality. Not only that, but dried out peatland leaches carbon back into the atmosphere. Blanket bog is a habitat that exists on the uplands and the higher areas of Northern Ireland. So the importance of looking after peatlands in the uplands is that they're linked to the lowland lakes such as Lough Neagh. When peatlands function well up here, they're holding carbon, but they're also holding water, and they're allowing the water to be held back and to be released slowly into the rivers and down into Lough Neagh. And how they hold that water is through the sphagnum moss that grows in the bog. It absorbs the water, it keeps it there, and it filters it through very slowly into the lakes below. So the quality of that water on its way down into Lough Neagh is looked after by having pristine bogs that do that job for the loch. Peatlands all over the world are in trouble and they are very useful in combating climate change. So what happens here is that the drains have been blocked by putting dams in, which holds the water back, creates these little pools, and the sphagnum moss then begins to grow in these little pools, and it then helps the bog to reform in the areas where the pools exist. And that helps to re-wet the whole bog and keep it healthy. And that was a partnership project between Northern Ireland Water, Northern Ireland Environment Agency, the RSPB and others. So across the whole of Northern Ireland, 12% of the land surface is covered by peatland, but only 14% of that peatland is in good condition. Unfortunately, only 1% of the peatland has been restored in Northern Ireland over the last 30 years. So what happened here on the Garran Plateau was a great example of what we can do to restore peat across the whole of Northern Ireland.
As Seamus showed in that great wee spin around Garran, when we work together, we can make a real difference to habitats, wildlife and local communities. When our bogs are wet and healthy, they produce peat, which captures carbon from the atmosphere and locks it away. The bog also acts like a big sponge, absorbing water and reducing the risk of flooding across the land. But sadly, 86% of our bogs have been damaged due to drainage and extracting peat for horticulture and fuel. Planting trees and bogs also has a really negative impact on the health of peatlands. The poor condition of our peatlands means they are now releasing their captured carbon back into the atmosphere. This could be adding around 9% to Northern Ireland's total emissions. This is undermining our climate ambitions and doing little for people or nature. We need vital and urgent large-scale nature restoration, and we need support from the government to fund this. Other parts of the UK have already acknowledged the severity of the situation and recognise the significant benefits that nature restoration can bring to their communities. For example, England has established a £640 million Nature for Climate Fund, and Scotland has also committed £250 million over the next 10 years. So RSPB NI is calling on the Northern Ireland Executive to keep pace and fund a green recovery. This will ensure that public money and COVID-19 rescue packages not only revive the economy, but create jobs that directly restore nature, reduce carbon emissions, and create wildlife-rich green spaces for people.
You can support RSPB NI's call to revive our world today by sending an email to the Finance Minister asking for a Green Recovery Fund. Over 1,000 people have already spoken up for nature, but we need lots more voices. We're putting the link into the comments below so that you can get involved. When you click, you'll find an email that we've written to make it easier to contact the Minister. Or you can add your own spin on why you think the government needs to invest in nature, and this will make sure that it really hits home.
Dakota's right. Without people like you standing up for nature and supporting our work, we wouldn't be able to undertake half of the conservation efforts you've seen today. There is so much potential for our natural world to thrive and benefit all of us. That's why we need to invest in the restoration and protection of nature right now. But enough from us. What do you all think? I reckon it's time for some questions. Now then, I have a few questions here on the side. Let me see, make sure I get this right. Catherine is helping us behind the scenes. Jonny, here's one for you. How does increasing hedgerows balance with efficient farming and see the very large fields you see now?
Thanks, Claire. I think, a trend that we've seen over the last number of decades is sort of bigger and more intense farms, okay? And that has meant creating larger fields and often removing hedgerows to do that. So by doing that, we're actually taking away a vital habitat, but also a vital carbon store. So we need to, as we mentioned earlier, and as was mentioned in the video by Mark, we need to look at opportunities for actually restoring hedgerows and better managing our hedgerows, and also rewarding farmers and landowners for that better management of the hedgerows.
Thanks, Jonny. There's a few questions here that I'll answer. One from Sarah Jones regarding the best way for young children to get involved with RSPB NI. So RSPB NI has an amazing education and outreach team that go into schools. So your school can request a visit from one of our teachers, one of our educationers, to go in and speak to the young people. And there's lots of resources online that school children can get involved in, as well as a big schools birdwatch that happens every year between January and February. And for Morgan Luton, is there anything I could do with a small walled and paved city garden to cater for birds? Yes, there is. Doesn't matter how small your space is, you can always do something for birds, whether it's using the heights of the walls and putting some climbers up so you can get things like ivy. Even the ivy is brilliant because it has flowers for pollinators like honeybees, and bumblebees would really, really appreciate that pollen at that time of year. Or Tony Aster is great for berries, for blackbirds, but even any small amount that you can put in is brilliant. And a wee pond or a wee water bath for birds is also really, really good. So honestly, you can do anything in a very small space. Loads on our website on rspb.org.uk as well about how to garden better for wildlife. And then another one here from Felicity Curry. Can farmers or anyone else buy a winter cover seed mix? What does it cost? Is it subsidised through any mechanism? Yes, if you're a farmer or a landowner, you can apply for DERA's Department of Agriculture and Environment and Rural Affairs Environmental Farming Scheme. Sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful. They have an agri-environment scheme where farmers can apply to and get paid to put in things like the wild bird cover that we've seen in the video at Mark's on those two farms. So there is mechanisms in place. You will get a payment for it if that's on a farm scale. Do take advantage of it. So that's Environmental Farming Scheme on the DERA website. You'll have all the information on that. And yeah, a lot of places are selling a seed mix for birds, but what you really want is some grain seed for the green-eating birds like yellowhammers and tree sparrows. And then for smaller birds like the linnets, the finches, they like the oily seed, they like the oilseed rape and the flaxseed and things like that. So just any kind of mix of seeds, plus throw in some wildflowers as well, and that'll look lovely if you have enough space in your garden to do that. But keep it away back from the house because Mark says there's a lot of seed in it. It attracts a lot of small mammals, so you might want them just quite as close as you would some wildflower mixes. And Dakota, there's one here from Alice McManus. Should we feed the birds in our garden all year or just in the autumn, winter? We've got goldfinches in our garden for the first time this year.
Yes, absolutely. Feeding the birds all year round is brilliant. We do that here at home, and it's great because in the breeding season, that extra food source is really beneficial for them. Although we were talking about the hungry gap earlier on when there aren't as many invertebrates during sort of those months of November to March. With the chicks that they're feeding, it's really essential that they have an extra food source during the summer as well. And also, if you're lucky and those birds breed in your garden, you might get to see them bringing their fledglings down to your bird table. So last summer we had juvenile bullfinches and goldfinches down at our bird table, which was a real treat to see, sort of supporting the birds paying off like that and seeing them actually breeding in our own garden.
Thanks, Dakota. How lovely. R. Maxwell, you've asked me if RSPB can give advice to smaller landowners or only for large farms. We give advice to all farm landowners or land managers, but we are that one-to-one advice is very in certain particular areas, and County Down is one of those areas, as is Antrim Hills and places in Fermanagh. But we have a really good website, and there's also the Nature Friendly Farming Network, which is an independently run farmer network for farmers that are really interested in nature friendly farming. So have a look on the NFFN website and you'll get other brilliant info is there as well. But look on the RSPB website and you'll see if you fall into one of our categories and we can go out and visit you. Sorry, just reading down here. Sorry, I'm just taking me a bit of time here. Dakota, this is from Knick-Knack. I saw some sort of little newts in the small pond up near the car park at Portmore. What would they have been?
So I got up to Portmore Lough one time over the summer and haven't been there since I was volunteering before the pandemic. And yes, I've also seen the newts in the wildlife pond down there. I believe that they're common newts. I imagine that Catherine from Portmore Lough could give us confirmation on that. But that wildlife pond there is brilliant. Different types of water snails in there, frogs, a lot of dragonflies and damselflies about. And I saw common darters up there over the summer, which was brilliant.
Lovely, Dakota, thank you. Jonny, a question for you. With the regular rise in nitrates, phosphates, antibiotics, residue, etc. in the air, soil, water through increasing agro-intensification, how can SSI, etc. be protected?
Yeah, it's a big challenge that we face here in Northern Ireland and across the UK in terms of our water quality. And one of the big issues impacting on our water quality here is from phosphates and nitrates, and that typically comes from spraying fields at certain times of year. And then those phosphates and nitrates, if they're not absorbed by the soil and the fields, they can then run off into our watercourses, causing real problems for our water quality and our biodiversity. So it's critically important that we only spray at certain times of year, and that we sort of abide by the regulations as farmers in that regard. And I suppose, yeah, ultimately we need to think about a sustainable approach to farming to ensure that we keep water quality high and that we tackle that problem. So can be a mix of land use issues that lead to that water quality problem. So land use decision making and how we manage our land and our soils is critically important to prevent that problem.
Jonny, from an advocacy point of view, what can we do to get ministers involved?
Yeah, look, it's a really important time. As we mentioned earlier, we've got a campaign that's ongoing. We're asking for the finance minister to allocate money to a green recovery. We're facing a climate crisis. We're also facing a nature crisis. So it's not just about the technological solutions to climate change, things like renewables or retrofitting. Nature can play a really powerful role in helping to tackle climate change, whether it's restoring our peatlands, planting native trees, or restoring our blue carbon at sea. So we think through a green recovery, we can invest in restoring these really important natural carbon stores that can help us tackle climate change and help revive nature.
Harriet, thank you for that question. I'm going to ask Dakota also how she would, with her experience with campaigning, what she would add to that.
Yeah, so there are lots of ways to get involved in these sorts of campaigns, and it's great for young people to get involved in these campaigns as well, because as I was previously talking about, it is our future that's at stake because of the joint biodiversity and climate crises. So yes, you can join campaigns like the RSPB's campaign, which makes it really easy by setting out the e-action that you can fill in. But on a lot of the environmental issues that we're facing at the moment, there are petitions that you can sign. Spreading general awareness via social media is great. And then if you want to go to a little bit more extra effort, if it is something you're really passionate in, writing to your own MLA or MP directly is really brilliant, especially when you are using a personal message and talking from your own experience. That can be really persuasive for politicians. And at the end of the day, we are the voters. They do have to listen to what we say. So it is brilliant, especially for young people, to try and get involved in these campaigns and make our voices heard.
Thanks, Dakota. Edwina Mara sent a question in. My brother has seen a lesser spotted woodpecker in his garden for the first time near Crossgar. Is this unusual? Edwina, it would be very unusual if it was a lesser, less so if it was a greater spotted woodpecker. So you can get them to double check the ID for you. Greater spotted woodpeckers have just kind of arrived in Ireland in the last 10 years or so, and they've become more widespread. So they're still small numbers. They were never here before, so it wasn't a matter of them becoming extinct. They just moved over from GB into Ireland, but they've spread out really quickly. And now in the next month or so, we'll start hearing them drumming trees, and it's really lovely. In Beaver Park Forest, where our headquarters are, we can go out in the morning and you can almost guarantee hearing a drumming woodpecker. Now it's much harder to see, of course, but they will come to peanuts into feeders if you're lucky enough to have them breeding nearby. So I hope I haven't missed any questions. I'll just get another scan. Oh, here's one here. Sarah, Dakota, this is one for you from Sarah. How can I support RSPB's work?
Yeah, so you can join the RSPB, and it's only about £5 a month, I think, to join as a member, which is great. And you get the Nature's Home magazine, which updates you on all of the conservation work that the RSPB is doing. You also get free access to our reserves, and you also know that you're making a contribution towards nature. You can also volunteer with the RSPB, and I started volunteering with the RSPB the summer before the pandemic, and unfortunately couldn't return last summer because of coronavirus. But that's a really good way to see the on-the-ground conservation work that's being done at places like Portmore Lough and Rathlin Island, and you really get to see the sort of a real different side to the reserves than you do as a visitor. And I mean, my experiences on Rathlin Island were brilliant, and I was really excited to go back last year, but unfortunately it didn't happen. But you can also, the RSPB through social media and on their website, provide lots of tips for supporting nature more broadly, which you can follow for things like supporting nature in your garden, which we've talked a bit about today, and the campaigns that you can get involved in with the RSPB.
Thanks, Dakota. We'll hear from Mike Yates. I live in a tree-lined lane. What can I do to encourage birds? Well, trees are brilliant for birds, for a lot of birds. As it is, they will nest in the trees, especially things if you're looking up like barn owls, but put up nesting boxes is a great and easy thing that you can do. And now is the time to do it, just before they start finding their territories and finding their nesting spots. So if you can get some nesting boxes up, that's great. Yeah, I think that's probably my best advice for a tree-lined lane, which is very nice. And the grassland under it as well. Remember, don't mow it as often. We've already talked about that. We try not to mow it too much, or plant some more bulbs if there's not enough of flowering plants there already. Jonny, what legislation is in the pipeline to help with this in Northern Ireland? That must be the advocacy work before.
Yeah, there's quite a lot in the pipeline right now. It's a busy time up at Stormont when it comes to legislation and policy. And of course, legislation is critically important, because if we can put into law the targets that we need for nature restoration or for climate change, that can drive action, and it can drive our policymakers and our decision makers to do more and to help deliver the transformation that we need. So targets and law is critically important. There's a climate bill that has been drafted, and the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs are looking at a climate bill for Northern Ireland. And this all came about from a lot of demand from the public and young people. About a year and a half ago, that you might have remembered protests on the streets of Belfast long before COVID kicked in. And that really made our policymakers and our politicians stand up and realise we need climate change legislation for Northern Ireland. And the executive committed to that back at the start of 2020. And I'm quite positive that this year we will see a climate change bill hit the Assembly floor up at Stormont. And that could bring in legally binding targets that could deliver the transformation that we need across sectors in Northern Ireland.
Thanks, Jonny. Another question for you. Does more need to be done to ensure that ecological impact is a priority criteria in various future initiatives, for example, renewable energy, agriculture, etc.?
Yep, I believe that'll be critically important. So when we're bringing forward climate change legislation and we're including targets for carbon reduction, we need to ensure that there aren't unintended negative consequences for biodiversity and for nature. So we're asking, and we'll be hoping, that the Climate Change Act includes a biodiversity duty to ensure that when we're setting and achieving targets, that biodiversity is considered. And we would also like to see nature-based solutions embedded in that legislation.
Thanks, Jonny. There's another question for David. I'm going to try and answer it, and if I don't get it right, Jonny, I might get you to chip in. From David Miller, please explain why leaving natural scrub progression is not a favoured process. In Northern Ireland, our priority farmland birds, the yellowhammer, the barn owl, curlew, lapwing, snipe, all of those species are farmland birds. And what that means basically is they need farmed landscape to be able to nest and breed in. So if the land was to scrub up too much, it would just mean that they wouldn't have the ground space. The breeding waders are ground nesting birds. So that will attract lots of predators. The scrub will just attract lots of foxes and crows to come in, and the birds won't stand a chance. And even things like yellowhammers, they need seed, they need that farmed landscape, they need arable land, they need farmers to plant oats and barley. So yeah, it's really important that we work really closely with farmers in Northern Ireland, and that's why we do go out and give so much advice, because these farmland birds are completely reliant on farmers. So we want to make sure that they get subsidised and get rewarded for doing things for nature on their farm, but make sure that they continue to do that going forward. I hope that answers your question. David Smith has a question. Any signs of a proper rewilding project in Northern Ireland along with the line of Knepp in West Sussex, or Trees for Life in Scotland? The Republic of Ireland has just got its first proper one in Dunsany, County Meath, which is good news. Dakota or Jonny, if you know of any of the rewilding projects that are happening in the north?
Not that I'm aware of right now, Claire. I don't know about the red kite reintroduction, whether that's something you could speak to.
Well, it's not rewilding.
It's not rewilding, but it's reintroduction.
It is reintroduction, yeah. So I will stress in that our priorities in Northern Ireland are our farmland species or our peatland restoration work. So and we have to focus our attention on that to get that right. So we are not involved at the moment in any rewilding project as we just let things regrow and go wild. But yeah, the Red Kite project was a really exciting project that the RSPB were involved in and led in partnership by reintroducing red kites back in 2008 to 2010 into County Down. And those birds are doing well. They still need a lot of work, a lot of attention, and we're still working very closely with a brilliant team of volunteers. But they're spreading out now across the country, which is really exciting to see. There's another question in here from Lauren Mallon. How do young people become climate activists during the COVID pandemic? Dakota, that's one for you.
Yeah, so I've actually found it's in some ways easier to get into activism during the pandemic because the geographic barriers that we had before aren't as much of an issue. So the Our Bright Future group that I'm in, we come from across Northern Ireland, people from right up in the northwest to down in Belfast and everywhere in between. And previously travelling to meet up would have been quite difficult. And as young people, you know, a lot of us don't drive and have to rely on public transport, which isn't as efficient as it could be in Northern Ireland. So it's really been quite helpful actually to be able to connect with young people all across Northern Ireland to campaign on these issues. And there are so many groups like this that you can join that are currently very much online based. The likes of YCANI and Youth Climate Action in Northern Ireland, that is, and Fridays for Future. Before the pandemic, Fridays for Future had a lot of actual regional groups, which made it easier for you to actually get involved in climate activism, and that these have moved online now, which makes it quite accessible to get to attend these things whenever transport is an issue. And obviously a lot of the activism around the climate crisis is over social media. And while there are disadvantages and advantages to protesting in real life versus online, it does mean that you're able to sort of reach a wider audience. And there's lots of it's quite easy to get involved in these sorts of things, either through your university climate action groups or through sort of more regional groups. So thankfully, it hasn't been, climate activism has still stayed alive during the pandemic. And while the focus has sort of switched to COVID in a lot of ways, sort of thinking about a green recovery and embedding climate action in a recovery programme for COVID has been a real focal point in a lot of people's activism over the sort of past year.
Thanks, Dakota. A question in from Tabitha. Have you any advice on how I can encourage my neighbours and even the local businesses in my area to be more nature friendly in their gardens or in their land? Yes, so there's lots of stuff on our website and we are kind of looking this currently within RSPB about how we can work closely with businesses. We already do work with quite a few through the Pledge for Nature project. And this is where we get businesses that have large areas of land to not do the mow, not cut their grassways and stuff in May, do all of that, but also put up lots of swift boxes. But within your own gardens, the more flowering plants you have is brilliant for pollinators and bird species as well, and making sure there's lots of cover in there for species. But the more different habitats that you have, the more you can attract different species, whether it's birds or insects, into your garden, or mammals as well. We all like to see a wee hedgehog if we're very lucky. And then for businesses, of course, we're talking about the future, about getting swift bricks into new buildings, green roofs, SUDs, which is that sort of sustainable urban drainage systems around our buildings. So we are working hard, and we do have an urban advisor in Northern Ireland who's just started sort of on a part-time basis, and we're trying to sort of reconnect and reach out to those businesses to encourage them to do more green things for nature around their businesses. Thank you for all the questions, folk. I think that is it. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. Thank you all for your great questions, and we are so sorry we don't have more time. All that's left to say is thank you for joining us on our journey around Northern Ireland. We've really enjoyed showing you our work to save nature, which is only possible thanks to your kind donations and support.